These, as Dan mentioned, these are sure bizarre days, and seems like a lot of an unusual amount of things going on as far as severe, serious health issues in our congregation, which I don't really remember a time when we've had this. But at any rate, literal life and death issues. So please keep those requests in your prayers daily. Matthew 7 is the third chapter. 5, 6, and 7 are the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew's version of it. Luke has a version of it. It's a shorter one. So we usually look to the 7th chapter of Matthew for looking at the Sermon on the Mount. And about halfway through the 7th and last chapter of the Sermon on the Mount, we get Jesus' conclusion, his summary, his applications of what does all this mean that I just said to you. And obviously they are applications we need to pay attention to. And I think especially in any day, obviously, but in the days we're in, of seems to be gathering clouds and maybe coming separation of the sheep from the goats. Persecution in some form has always been permitted by God. And you understand me here. I'm not remotely questioning God. I wish he wouldn't do that, but he does. And he also knows precisely what he's doing. And he has always said, judgment will begin at the house of God. And he will winnow, sift the wheat from the chaff. There's much of that in this sermon. And what I want to read today would be the conclusion, really, beginning with the 13th verse of chapter 7 and read through the end of the sermon. I'll be reading from the English Standard Version this morning, but you shouldn't notice a lot of difference in whatever you're reading or following along with. Verse 13, enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide, and the way is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter by it are many. For the gate is narrow, and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few. Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will recognize them by their fruits. Are grapes gathered from thorn bushes, or figs from thistles? So every healthy tree bears good fruit, but the diseased tree bears bad fruit. A healthy tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a diseased tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus you will recognize them by their fruits. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. On that day many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name and cast out demons in your name and do many mighty works in your name? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness. Everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house. But it did not fall, because it had been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who builds his house on the sand. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it. There are 4 things I want us to see in this passage. They follow the paragraphs here that Jesus gave in conclusion and the applications he applied. We have to remember this. Jesus wants every one of us to go to heaven. He wants us to make it to heaven. He wants us to avoid every pitfall and detour that would lead us away. So he told us these things. We can trust him. He loves us enough that he died for us. He's not going to lead us astray. He's not going to minimize things that matter. He's not going to magnify things that don't matter. He's not going to lead me astray. I can trust him with my soul. He'll tell me the truth. He is here. And there are several things he wants us to beware of. Even though this conclusion seems to be, and this was a hard sermon that Jesus preached. He spent a lot of time attacking common, what you'd call common wisdom that isn't wisdom, common thinking in the religious world that was false. And so this whole sermon is really a lot of destroying false notions. But it's not a negative sermon. It's not a downer. It's not you leave and go to the parking lot to your car with your head hanging down and there's no hope. No, he's wisely telling us, now don't go for this and don't go for that. Why? Because I want you to make it safely to heaven. And here's what you should look to. Here's what I want you to listen to. Here's what I want you to do. The first thing we see here is in these 2 verses, 13 and 14. There is a fatal popularity. I want you to think about that. A fatal popularity. Jesus warns us against going the way that he says many go. He said it is a wide gate that you enter, and it is a broad way, but it leads to destruction, and there are many that walk on that road. We are, the whole human race is, but especially our culture, we are bitten with the bug of popularity as a measuring rod. I think we're bad in that everywhere, but we're just as bad as the world is when it comes to the church. I've spent my entire life in the ministry since I was 22 years old. And I've never yet, in all of those years, I have never yet gotten an invitation to a big convention, conference, whatever, of Christian leaders that always has a list and pictures of maybe 10, 12, who knows, different people that are going to be invited. The keynote speaker is so-and-so. I've never yet gotten one where it says so-and-so is a bivocational pastor in a rural area. He works at the local, and I've known some guys, so I'm describing people I know. He works at the local grain mill in the town of 600 so he can supplement his income, and he has a congregation of 35. Come and hear him speak. Never got one of those yet. What is it? Oh, this is whoever. He planted this church, not God. He planted this church, and in 3 weeks it was 10,000. Now he's got 16 campuses, 40 to 50,000. Come in here. It's exactly what Jesus is talking about. Exactly. We swallow it, hook, line, sinker, oars, seat cushions. The church is not any different than the world. The world is, we have people who are very popular by pretending to be somebody else. We call them actors, okay? And because they're really good at pretending to be somebody else, what they think about life, morals, the country, our culture, really. And I don't even know I'm always, not always, but I'll read the headlines, and I'll tell Liz, I'm devastated. I don't know how I'm going to go to the office today. I'm just shot because, Kanye West said such and such, and the Kardashians. We are certifiably insane. And it's bled into the church. There is a way that seemeth right unto man, Proverbs says, but the end of it is the way of death. John Wesley, I used to have a little saying a quote from Wesley, a letter he wrote to one of his preachers, who was bemoaning the fact that a lot of his adherents, a lot of his parishioners that he preached to in the little community where he was a lay preacher working under Wesley's supervision, someplace in England, and he was grieving about the small results of his work. And Wesley's quote is, he wrote in this letter, he said, "It is nothing strange, it should not be thought strange, that those who love the world should not love to continue with us." Then he quotes a little section of a poem. Down the stream of nature driven, meaning human fallen nature, down the stream of human nature. Then he says this, they seek a broader way to heaven. Then he concludes, however, let us keep to the good old way. And that doesn't mean back when I was a kid. It's a quote from Jeremiah, okay? The good old way. He said, however, let us keep to the good old way. It brings us peace at the last. Okay? Never in the history of the Bible, hardly, has the majority been on God's side and been right. The Old Testament is full, and the New as well, of a remnant. When God told Elijah, don't think things are so bad that you're the only preacher left that's preaching the truth. He said, don't despair. You think you're the only one. He said, there are 7,000 in Israel that haven't bowed the knee to Baal or kissed his image, gone off into idol worship. There's 7,000. Now we read that and we think, Yeah, don't despair. There were millions in Israel then. There were millions. Near that time, there is a census taken of the 20 and up to whatever it was, soldiers. And they had 1.1 million soldiers of that age, males. That's a big population. So when we have to know the context, when God says to Elijah, there's 7,000, our response would be, well, that's nothing. But not to God. Not to God. It is fatal to follow the latest religious fads and the glittery junk, the flashing neon, cheap, gaudy junk. This is fatal, to go after the road because everyone else is walking this road. Now, quickly before we move on, what's the danger here that I have to point out? That we become, it's us four, no more, and we can get kind of sour and crotchety and grouchy, and that I don't have to deal with that problem. Right? I don't have any tendencies that way. Some of us who do have to watch that, because you can get to where everything is so good. We got to stay out of that pitfall. But Jesus wasn't a negative downer, but he told the truth. So, avoid following just because it's popular. Many walk that road. And then he gives us hard truth. Said the gate is narrow. And there were two gates, the great big gates of the cities that would swing open, took several people to open them. And then, so you didn't have to go to the trouble to open the great big, there was just a small door. And that's what Jesus called or nicknamed the eye of the needle. And he said it's easier for a camel to go through that little door so you don't have to open the big gates than it is for a rich man to get to heaven. But he says here, this is a really narrow gate that'll squeeze you as you pass through it. And then the path that's laid out is hard. It's hard. And again, I don't want to fall into the very pitfall I just warned of. But, honestly, and I'll move on. I don't pay much attention to, I will listen to music on Christian radio. I think that I can stand before God and say, I may never, maybe in the last 35, 40 years, if I ever listened to a whole sermon or Bible study on a Christian radio station. 99% of it is drivel. It's nonsense. It's balderdash. It's a nice old English word. I don't pay attention to that. I have it right here. Read this. The Holy Spirit is a fairly good interpreter of the Scripture. Read this. One great author that I read through the years makes a statement in one of his books. If you're spending more time reading my book than you are the Bible, close my book right now. That's good advice. Wesley, when he died after 50-some years of preaching, he was called a man of one book. Now, he was widely read. One of the most widely read scholars of his day. But he was a man of one book. This one. This will lead me home. Second, there is, I've touched on it, the peril of false preaching. Jesus said, beware of false prophets. They come in sheep's clothing, but inside they're ravening wolves. What does he mean by ravening wolves? Even if they may not harm you physically, they harm you spiritually in the most important way. Someone as great as Paul and a group of believers in a little place called Berea is our example here. The Bereans, it said, were visited by Paul after he left Thessalonica. He was heading south on the east coast of the peninsula of Greece, and he came to a place called Berea, found some practicing Jews there, went to their synagogue, began teaching them that the Christ had come and the good news of the gospel, the Messiah had arrived. And it says, and remember, Paul got there, had some reputation. He raised people from the dead. He healed all kinds of diseases. He preached all over everywhere. Converts clear up into the house of Caesar were made by Paul. He came with the credentials that ought to make us, if we were Bereans, just swoon over him. Well, hey, Paul said it. That's good enough for me. It says that they eagerly searched the scriptures daily to see if the things Paul was saying were really so. They didn't put even Paul on a pedestal and just hook, line, and sinker swallow whatever he said. They went to the Bible and sought and searched and checked if indeed what a towering figure like Paul, if he was right. It is, listen, any preacher, whether it doesn't matter, any preacher that tries to get you to follow him and makes your allegiance to him a line of demarcation, leave. Get out of a church like that. Even if you have what you believe is a faithful pastoral staff, check it by the Bible. It doesn't matter what we say. It has to be here. There's false preaching. There's lots of it. Jesus warned the disciples. He said, beware when all men speak well of you. Beware when you are selling books and you are very popular and everyone thinks, he said, look out. Why? He said, because that's how they always treated the false prophets. The false prophets tickled their ears, told them what they wanted to hear, watered down the truth to make it and sugared it up so it would be palatable and it would taste good. And they kept any bitter herbs out of it, and they made sure to round off any sharp corners. And so everybody spoke well of them. I tell you what, he's great. We have to be careful. We have to be careful, all of us, lest we fall into these pitfalls. Third, this one can trouble some people, so I want to make sure we don't do that. But in 21, it said, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. That is obedience. That is not some profession of faith that carries with it in its wake no radical life change. Not everyone who lauds me, the words here mean exclaims, "Oh, you're the Lord, you're the Lord." Not everyone who says that, he said, will make it to heaven, but those who do the will of my Father. Now, this is the peril of futile professions. Everybody can profess. That's easy. It's talking is easy. Walking is what God's looking for. Do the will of my Father who's in heaven. And listen, let me give you some harsh truth. God's will is not always pleasant. God's will is not always something we would choose. The truth of the matter, when we present God, and here's the quandary we're in. Is life better if you walk with God? Of course. Jesus said, "Blessed are those who keep my word." Blessed are you. That's happy, that's joyful, that's filled with peace and grace. But in the midst of that, this world is no friend to anyone seeking to walk with God. And Jesus said here, he warned us, the way is narrow and it's hard. Now, the promise is then that if you just give to God, he'll give back. Everybody here knows what seed tithing is. I don't want to shoot it down too much. Maybe we may need it sometime. Seed tithing, as if God's too stupid to see through this. He said, you make $100, you give $10 to me. It's mine. You keep it, you're a thief. That's the way God talks. He doesn't get it. And so the idea is, I'll give God $10 up front, and then he's obligated to give me $100 because I gave him 10 first. As if God's going, wow, I never thought of that. Or the idea, if you get saved, I'll tell you what, it's health, wealth, everything's great. The whole prosperity gospel, which is a tsunami, is this kind of stuff. It is, if you do what God tells you to do, if you acknowledge him, he'll bless you. Yes, he will. He'll pour his Spirit into your heart. He'll give you grace and light and truth to carry you and help you through difficult time after heartache, after disappointment. That's what Jesus promised. We have to face it. But what a companion we have holding our hand and walking by our side and walking to and fro, as it were, in the fiery furnace with the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Notice instantly, he didn't just say, I bind you, Satan, and let him out of the fire. He got in the fire with them. They were still in the fire. But there were now 4 of them. And wicked King Nebuchadnezzar looked and he said, one of them looks like a son of the gods. I don't know what's going on here. That's what he does. And then they got out. The point is, God never promised we wouldn't get in the furnace. He said, I'll be in there with you. There's no suffering. There's nothing that we ever will face that Jesus hasn't faced. Disappointment, abandonment by friends and loved ones. Jesus came, it says, and the wording here is good. He says he came into the world and the world didn't know him. And then the language, the original language is clear. It's as if, and then he went to his own house. I gave I think I mentioned this in one of the little devotionals I've been doing. And that's made, I can't even go out to eat or shopping anymore because, people stop me. Are you the guy that does those? Anyway, basically what Jesus said in John, I came into the world and they didn't know me. He says, I came into the state. I came to the nation, or even as big as I came to the human race and they didn't know me. But then I went to my own house, my own driveway, my own home, and they refused me. Have we had that happen? So has Jesus. Have we gone through what he did? No. Never will, can't. But he said, I went through all that so I can walk with you through it. I'll keep you, I'll help you. And if I see it's wise and best, I may let you perish for your faith. I read a lot of church history. I had, that you guys provided for us, the privilege of seeing some church history sites standing in the square at Oxford where Francis Ridley, Hugh Latimer were burned at the stake. There's now a big statue there. But one day there was a pile of firewood and a stake that they were tied to, and God let them burn. Do you get that? Oh, he swooped in and he made everything good for them. No, they died. A lot of them died. Some escaped. Most didn't. But they committed themselves to God and they said, Lord, if by my shed blood your gospel goes forward, thy will be done. The way can be hard. But God said, I'll walk with you through it. And the flame will not kindle upon you. The floods will not overwhelm you. He'll help me. Don't buy then this business that we can just profess and things will be great and we'll be fine and we won't have any trouble. That's not true. And Jesus dealt with those kinds of superficial professions. He said, not just, waving your hands and singing Christian music all the time and saying the cliches and buying all the latest, stuff, okay? Listen, I'm old. I got to face it. I've read more, how many of you remember the prayer of Jabez? Okay? I mean, it was the prayer of Jabez. Have you read the prayer of Jabez? You haven't? No, I haven't. I've read the prayer itself. I know about the prayer. But literally, there were prayer of Jabez video series, Bible studies, the prayer of Jabez Bibles. I don't know what that's about. Prayer of Jabez, I've seen them. Prayer of Jabez keychains. This is nuts. And because I prayed the prayer of Jabez, things are good. No, Jesus said, if you do the will of my Father which is in heaven, which sometimes may be very costly, It may cost me friends. It may cost my reputation. I've got to stand with God. I have to do His will. His will, in the end, is all that matters. But what deep down, even in trouble, deep down joy there is in here in knowing God's pleased with me. Hebrews says they had, all those people who went before us, they had this testimony that they pleased God. They made God happy. That's what matters, because I'm going to appear before Him. And here he says, in that day, that's Judgment Day, I will say, I never knew you. Now you look here, please let me just say this. Don't get timid hearts, conscientious hearts, dear hearts, tender hearts. Read this and think, dear God, am I fooled? Do I think I'm a Christian and I'm not? Listen, that's not possible. You cannot deceive yourself without knowing it, because God will shout from the housetops that your foundation is not, it's on your own motives. He will tell you. He will warn you. And there's something we don't necessarily get here from this language. It says, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name and cast out demons? The language here, which doesn't come across in the English as well, is haughty and conceited and arrogant. It is literally, Lord, it's talking down to Him. Lord, you know as well as we do all the great things we did in your name. That's the attitude and the language that comes here. It's a language of condescension even to God. You have to acknowledge us. We did all this for you. That usually doesn't sit too well with God. Okay? But that's what this means. So this shows these are unrepentant deceivers, self-righteous, whom God did His best to alert to that fact and enlighten them, and they wouldn't listen. So don't any of you here go home and beat yourself up. Oh, I think maybe I'm fooled. Am I going to hear that? No, you're not going to hear that at Judgment Day if you walk with God. You can't get in trouble with God unless you do it on purpose. For something to be defined as sin, I have to know what I'm doing and make a choice. No, Lord, I'm not going to do your will. I want to do my will. Just don't do that. We're fine. Let me say this and then I'll move on, then you'll be all grateful. There won't be any surprises personally on judgment. We may be surprised at somebody we see, man, I don't know how that guy got in here. I didn't think he'd make it. Maybe we'll be surprised, or we'll be surprised at someone we don't see there who we figured would be. But on my part, am I going to stand there totally convinced, completely assured I'm right with God, and then He breaks the news to me that I'm not? No, that can't happen. Because He is faithful to monitor me and you every moment of every day. And He says, we have to trust God here, He's faithful. He said, if you start turning aside to the right hand or to the left hand, He said, you'll hear a voice behind you saying, hey, 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 walk in this way. Don't turn aside that way. He will tell us. The only way then that I can end up in the mess these guys got into is to willingly, self-righteously deceive myself and do it for the praise of men. Finally, foolish preparation. Building your house either on the rock or building it on the sand. He says you're a fool if you build it on the sand. Let me just summarize that. You build on the rock, it costs you way more money. take you way longer. Eat through all kinds of building loans. Okay? Man, alive, we can't afford that. We'll never be able to make the payments. We simply cannot get down to bedrock. Surely there's a different, better, shorter, cheaper way that we can do it. We could build on the sand. Listen, you build on the sand, scrape down a little bit, but you build on the sand, boy, you're going to see progress way quicker. This guy over here, all you see is a hole and some dirt coming out of it once in a while. He's going nowhere. I'm not going to hire him as a builder. Because this is going up. Looks good. It's done. Sale pending is out in front. Money's in escrow. Deal closes. Move in. Over here, maybe the guy's just starting to pour some foundation, concrete. By the world. All of it, Jesus said, is preparing for the storms that will come. If we don't first, our spouses will stand by a fresh grave. We may bury a child. We may get up one day and it seems the day is completely normal, and within a couple of days, some physical ailment, we go to the doctor and we get a totally devastating, life-altering, shattering diagnosis. That's the wind and the waves and the floods. They are coming. Don't believe people who say they won't. In that day, I better know God. I better know God. And have my foundation down on the rock. The other, he says, will fall, and it'll be a great fall. It'll be widely known. It'll be a messy affair. And it'll fall. These are the words of Jesus, not mine. May we take them to heart and apply them and live them. We'll pray. Jessica will lead us in some music. Father in heaven, I know that you want us to be sober while being assured, confident. We have a God who tells us the whole truth and nothing but the truth, sticks to it, and will stand by us. And you, Lord, you will not leave us or forsake us. You'll hold our hand, and you will make good on every single syllable of what you've said to us. You'll keep your word. We thank you and we praise you. In Jesus' name, amen.